Hello, and thanks for joining us. Today we're going to tie up the Professor. This is a traditional trout fly, but we're actually going to substitute some materials and tie this a little bit different because we're going to tie it for panfish. Great thing about this fly, if you want to get into tying wet flies, this is an excellent fly as an introduction to how wet flies are tied. This particular fly, there's a gentleman by the name of Don Bastian who has an excellent article about the history of this fly and how it's traditionally tied. There will be a link in the descriptions down below. So we're going to go ahead and use a couple of different methods for tying this today that are not your traditional wet fly type methods for it, but we're going to go ahead and do those and share that with you. And let's get started. We're going to get our hook and the vise, and then we're going to take our white thread. This is just a Danville 6/0 white thread that I'm going to use as a base for the floss on this. I'm going to attach the thread right behind the eye of the hook, and then I'm going to advance it down the hook shank in touching turns all the way down to the point of the hook. And then I'm going to tie in my tinsel. I'm using a size 16 and 18 Danville Mylar tinsel. This is gold on one side and silver on the other side. This is a good size for this size hook. This is a Mustad 3399 traditional wet fly hook. This is a size 6. You can also use a Mustad 3906 for this. It's a little bit heavier wire, but that will work just as well. So I'm going to take my tinsel with the silver side up, and I'm going to bring it underneath the thread like this, and I'm going to bring it right on top of the hook. The thread acts as a third hand here, basically helping to hold it in place. I'm going to slide that down so that I have just barely a little bit sticking out from those thread wraps, and this is where I'm going to tie it in. I'm going to advance my thread down the hook shank in touching turns, 12 wraps. There's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And that should put me hanging right here at the base of the barb. Now these have a micro barb on them, but right at the very bottom portion of the barb is where the thread should be hanging for me to start that tag. I'm going to turn the hook over in order to wrap the tag in, because then I don't have to navigate around the thread. I'll grab my tinsel, I'll bring it around, and I'll start wrapping that tag in. I'm going to put in 5 wraps of tinsel down the hook shank and then down the bend of the hook right here. There's 4 and 5. Now, if those aren't touching real nice and neat, you can turn around and take your thumbnail and just push those down a little bit just to get all of those together, so that you don't have any gaps. But the nice thing about this method of wrapping down and then wrapping back up is that when I wrap 5 turns back up, it will cover up any gaps. 3, 4, and 5. This will give me a nice solid gold tag on the back end of the fly that's very sturdy. Now I'm going to be careful with my thread wraps here. I've got one to bind in the tinsel. I'm going to put one more right in front of that previous one, and that's it. Normally I use 3 turns to bind things in, or should say anchor things down, but we want to be careful that we don't add too many thread wraps in here as we wrap in the body material. Otherwise we'll end up with a large bump in the back here that will translate into our fly. So I'm going to cut that off nice and neat. I'm going to put a couple of wraps right here just to anchor that tag down. Then the next material I'm going to tie in is my tail. For this particular fly, I'm just using some Hackle fibers for the tail. This is a whiting American hackle. It's a Rooster Saddle hackle. You could use a bass salt hackle as well, red. would work just as well. Now I don't need the fluff material here at the end. What I'm looking for are these longer hackle fibers right there. So I'm going to go ahead and peel this off just to get it out of the way. I'm going to stroke these fibers down so they're sticking out more perpendicular to the shank of the hook. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach in here and grab a clump of them like this, pull the tip down, and pull those off of the feather. I'm then going to bunch these together like this, and this is going to make up the tail of my fly. Now you'll notice that on the ends right here they're very thin, whereas the barbs, when they get back to the base here, get thicker. The thing you have to be careful of, if you make this too thick, then you're going to end up with more material in here, which would be in the body of the fly, so you'll have a thicker body. We're going to tie these in so that they're about a shank length long. Again, I'm going to be wary of how many wraps I put to tie this in. I'm going to get one wrap right where my thread was at, and one more towards the bend of the hook, and make certain that's positioned. I'm then going to take my tinsel again, and I'm going to put the silver side up. I'm going to use the thread as a third hand again. I'm going to slide the tinsel underneath the thread to the side of the hook. I can brace it with my finger while I hold the thread a little bit and slide the tinsel down. I want the end of the tinsel to be somewhere inside the body of the fly. And then I'm going to put one more wrap going down the hook shank right next to the other one to secure that in. The next material that we're going to tie in is going to be our floss body. I'm using a Danville 4-strand Rayon Floss. This is in a yellow. We're going to take out 4 strands, cut those, but I don't need all 4 of these strands. As you can see here, I'm actually going to take 2 of these out because I'm only going to use 2 of them for the body of this fly. Once I have those 2 separated, I'm going to, like the tinsel, bring it up underneath the thread, anchor it on the side here, put a little tension on my thread to hold it in place. I'm going to pull that back so that the tips of those are just inside what will be the body of the fly. I'll go ahead and put one more wrap in going downward, down the shank here, so that that is bound in. Now the primary reason I'm going downward here is that when I wrapped in the tinsel here, I actually moved the thread up 2 or 3 wraps to bind in that tinsel tag. When I wrap this floss around, I want the floss to actually start and cover up all these thread wraps and have it so that the tag and the tail look like they come directly out of the body. I don't want to see any thread wraps. So in that case, I actually wrap the tail, the tinsel, and the floss body in just a few wraps down the hook shank so that my thread right here hangs right at the front of the tag. Now that that's in place, I can go ahead and start wrapping my thread forward to collect all the material that's along the hook shank that will make more or less the body underneath the floss. Once I get a few wraps in up the hook shank and all of that's real secure, I'm going to reach in here and I'm going to trim off all the excess of the hackle fibers, floss or tinsel, anything like that. So all of it is just within the body of the fly. You can spin your bobbin counterclockwise to flatten your thread, and then continue to wrap up the hook shank with touching turns. Don't put too much tension on your thread as you're doing this, because if you do, you'll end up pulling all of the materials here to the other side of the hook shank as you're wrapping that in, and it'll create a spiral along the hook shank. You don't want that. So you just put enough tension to go ahead and collect all that down. Make certain that you're putting nice touching turns in. It'll give us a nice white base for the floss, as well as it makes it much easier to collect all those fibers along the hook shank without twisting them around. Once I have that all collected and my thread is about an eye length from the eye of the hook, I'm going to go ahead and take my floss here, and I'm going to stroke this away from the fly as I start to wrap around this first wrap. What this is doing for me is it's putting all of these little bits of floss under the same tension. That way, when I'm wrapping the body on this, the fibers of the floss don't tend to spread out as I go along. You'll notice that that very first wrap of floss covers up all the thread wraps right there on the hook shank, so it looks like the tag and the tail just come right out from the body. I'm going to go ahead and keep wrapping it forward. I'm going to overlap each wrap about halfway so that I get nice even wraps, nice and smooth, but I get a nice coverage of that yellow floss. Just take your time with this, you don't have to rush it. Once your floss gets up to your thread, just go ahead and lock it down, 2 or 3 wraps right there, and trim off the excess. Our rib, we're going to go ahead and wrap the rib forward. This is the Mylar tinsel. You want to have 5 evenly spaced wraps. Just start wrapping this up along the body. Your third wrap should be right in the middle of the hook shank, right there. Then you know you're getting them nice and even spaced. There's number 5, and our 6th wrap will end up right where our thread is at. Careful that that last 5th wrap, yep, that one did. Sometimes they'll slide forward a little bit, and I lost tension on it, so just start over again. Nothing wrong with that, just take your time. As I said, sometimes you get up to the very end and you go to bind that in, and that last wrap, that 5th wrap, just slides a little bit forward when you're going to go do that 6th wrap, which it did just again right there. Remember, this is just a little panfish fly, so you don't have to necessarily be this judicious in getting all of those wraps in. That last wrap I just put in, number 6, is actually going to be covered up by the head, but that helps me keep that 5th wrap from hopefully sliding forward. There we go. As I said, you don't necessarily, because we're tying this mostly for panfish, you don't have to turn around and be this fastidious about your wraps and everything. At this point, you could, if you wanted to, put some head cement on here to protect the floss. We're not going to, just for the sake of expedience in tying this, but you could do that and it would reinforce that fly even a little bit more. I'm going to advance my thread forward to the eye of the hook. Now I'm going to go ahead and attach my black thread. I'm using a black uni thread 8/0. This is just for the head of the fly, and the reason to use the white so far in the fly is because if the floss tends to be somewhat translucent when it gets wet. If you used a dark thread under there, it would darken up the color of that yellow. It will probably darken up a little bit anyway with the red underneath it, but the white at least will help keep that yellow color looking more yellow than a dark, say, mustard color. I'm going to attach my black thread right behind the eye of the hook, holding the bobbin and the tag in my left hand. I'm going to advance it down the hook shank just about an eye length right there. This is where we'll be tying in our false hackle and our wing. Trim that away. Now there's a number of ways that we can make the beard for this fly. I'm going to use a brown Schlappen hackle. You could use a hen hackle if you want to, or even a Rooster Saddle hackle. What we're going to do is we're going to peel off all this fluffy fibers right here. We don't need this. Some people will actually take the feather fibers, or I should say barbs, that they want to use for their beard, peel them off, and then match them, set them down on the table, and then match them together. And that certainly is one way of doing it. I learned an interesting way from a gentleman by the name of Don Bastian years ago from watching one of his DVDs on tying classic wet flies, where you actually take your hackle pliers. We can cut this excess off here. We're going to take our hackle pliers right here, and we're going to attach them to the feather like this. And what this does is it gives me a little bit of weight in my hand so that I can turn around and hold this really nice, and I can manipulate the tip of the feather, the back of the feather with my hand, but these fingers are basically free to isolate a few of the fibers like this away from the rest of the feather. I don't want to pull them too far perpendicular, at least on this feather. They tend to start falling apart. And then isolate some over on the other side like this. Now I can take my thumb and index finger of my right hand and I can push down. I'll try and angle this here. You can push down just like this, and you'll see it just folds those right around. I can manipulate these just a little bit while they're right here and get them in place the way I want them. And then my left hand will come in and grab all of these fibers that are nice and neat together and pinch those real hard. I can either peel this off, but I generally find that tears the whole false hackle up. I like to just come in with my scissors and then just cut those off. That ends up keeping the false hackle together a little bit more, and you end up with a nice false hackle for tying in under the fly. I want the beard to be about the gap of the hook, and I want the tips to just go inside the gap. I don't want them to extend past the bend. I usually try to have them somewhere not much further than the barb of the hook. So I set those under here like this. My left hand is going to reach in and pinch those together. I'm going to roll my fingers forward a little bit over where the thread's at, and I'm going to bring my thread up to the other side like this, and I'm going to pull straight up. Roll my fingers back a little bit to open up that tie-in spot, and then I'm going to go ahead and put 3 or 4 more wraps in there just to secure this. I can tidy this up a little bit. We can trim some of these out if they're going in the wrong direction. If I like the look of that, which that looks fine to me, it's not extending past the bend of the hook, I'll put 1 or 2 more wraps in here, and then I'll reach in with my scissors and I'll trim off the excess. And yes, I grabbed a few of those fibers that were sticking out the front here just to go ahead and get those out of the way. I want to go ahead and wrap towards the eye of the hook at this point, binding in the butt ends that I just cut, and then tidying all of this up so that I have a nice level platform for my wing. When making the wings for our wet fly here, traditional wings for this fly usually are made out of mallard flank like this, and they're actually made where you cut out a section of the wing like this. It's called a slip, and you would have a right and a left feather like this that you would turn around and cut oops, if I can get these held in here for the camera right, you would basically cut out a right slip right here and a left slip here, and then you would match those together, just those slips, and you would have a nice little wing right here to go into your fly. The problem is finding in a package of mallard flank, finding a right and a left mallard flank like this is tough. The package that you get usually has all kinds of feathers that are thrown into it, and unless you buy them in bulk, it's difficult to find nice large feathers like this that would give you a number of different slips for our fly. So I basically developed a way similar to creating the beard on our fly, where we clip our hackle pliers to the stem and we fold this around. I do the same thing with a selected mallard flank feather. Again, I don't need the fluff here, so I'm going to go ahead and peel that off. I'm going to take a look at the barbs that I have here. I've got some that are kind of curled around here, and they will make things difficult as I try to fold that around. So I'm just going to peel those out. I don't need them. I want to peel some on the other side just to even this up. Ideally, what I'm looking for is some fibers such that when I peel, or excuse me, when I fold these around, these are going to match up with these. They're not too ragged. They're not too rough looking. Like before, I'm going to go ahead and cut off the excess of the stem, simply because that part of it tends to get in the way. I'm going to attach my hackle pliers to the stem right here so that I have control of it and can hold it in there. I'm going to move some of these fibers away from the rest of the feather out to the side just a little bit, just so they're separated. I'm going to do the same on this side over here. And then I can go ahead and just fold those around. If they're grabbing on the other side, you want to have those loose so that they'll just fold around nice and neat, just like this. Again, if they don't match up like this, that's fine. I have, for the most part down here, I have those held together. I can turn around and I can grab the two different sides and massage them a little bit, but as you can see, what I end up with is a nice, almost kind of pseudo slip of mallard flank fibers together for a wing. I'll hold these in my left hand, and I'm definitely going to cut these out because that stem tends to tear up the wing. So I cut those out. My right hand can then come in and grab that, and I have a nice wing for the fly. With my wing all created here, after I match those up, I want to set this on top of the fly where the tips are going to be somewhere between the bend of the hook and the tip of the tail. I'm going to hold these in place right on top. My left hand's going to come in and pinch those together. I'm going to show you an interesting technique for making these so that the wing doesn't quite get so smashed in the middle. We're going to take our thread and we're going to start our pinch wrap. I'm going to roll my fingers forward just like I would normally with a pinch wrap. I'm going to bring it around the other side and I'm just going to let it hang. My two fingers are basically keeping all of this from being compressed. I'm going to take my right hand and grab the front of the wing, roll my fingers back, and then where that thread's at, what I can do is just push down with the front while my left is holding the back secure, and you see that thread just falls right down to the hook. I'll roll my left fingers forward just a little bit and pull on that thread just to cinch it down to the hook, roll back, and now I'm going to put in 3 or 4 turns just to secure that in, and we can take a look and see how our wing looks. In this case, it looks pretty good. It's nice and straight. It's parallel. It's not as perfect or as nice and neat as, say, a wing that has, the nice curved slips to it and everything. But for our panfish fly, this will work just fine. Put in 1 or 2 more wraps to secure that in, and then I'll trim away the excess right up front here. I like to trim that at a little bit of an angle just to help the shape of the overall head. At this point, I'm going to wrap forward, binding in those butt ends a little bit, and then get to the eye of the hook and start the head of the fly. The head of the fly always starts right behind the eye of the hook. We're going to just advance backwards, covering up all the waist, and just tidying everything up and making certain it's all nice and neat. That's the purpose of the head of the fly. Once you have that all taken care of, we can go ahead and do a 5 or 6 turn whip finish. Smooth that off. And we can cut our thread. Now our fly is done. For just the panfish around here, I will go ahead and just put some head cement on that. I don't worry about making it a nice glossy looking head to it. However, if you would like to, you could turn around and use some UV resin. Just taking about a half a drop of UV resin and applying it to the head here. This is just kind of a quick and dirty way of getting that, lacquered finish look without having to go through all the steps of actually putting the lacquer on. This will make that a little bit more durable. Once you have that in place, go ahead and hit that with your light. And once that's cured, your fly is done. As I had mentioned, the Professor is a classic trout wet fly. It's been around for a long time. We tied it with, instead of Goose Shoulder, we just tied it with some Hackle fibers here and did more or less a modified wing on this just to make it a little bit quicker. It's a very durable fly, and for the panfish around here, it is just an excellent fly. Thanks for joining me today, tying the Professor. This is a great little wet fly. I hope you learned a few things, and I hope that you'll try to tie this fly yourself. It's a fun little fly to tie. If you enjoy the content that we provide, please hit the subscribe button down below. I would hit the notification icon so that you get emails notified whenever new videos are out, which we put a new video out every week. Also, it would be a great help if you shared these videos with your friends, anybody else you think that might be interested in fly tying, particularly the flies that I'm tying. Until then, always remember, it's just fly tying. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.